What's the craziest revenge you've taken on someone who wronged you? Story 1. In college, there was this house on our street that was known for its loud parties. It was the typical bro house vibe, beer cans and solo cups everywhere in the yard, music blaring all the time. The guys who lived there even made an illegal parking spot by moving curb slabs under a tree. They'd park there to avoid street parking. One night, I parked in front of the house, not realizing it was their makeshift spot. The next morning, I woke up to find my car keyed on both sides, with a giant smiley face scratched into the hood. A week later, the same thing happened to a PT Cruiser parked in that same spot. Fast forward 2 months, and we were moving to a new place. I decided it was time for revenge. One night, I threw a cinder block through their window. It smashed right into the bass guitar they had sitting inside, breaking the neck in half. I bolted out of there, told my roommates about it, and just waited. A month later, I felt like I got some closure. Story 2. When I was 17, my mom had a house built by a private contractor. This guy was an angry, manipulative jerk who ripped her off for $400,000, doing terrible work on the house. He bribed the county inspector to pass the house, and that ended up costing my mom another $100,000 to fix his mistakes. He did this to several other people, taking advantage of her, because she was a single woman. I told my mom I could handle him in a more permanent way, but she wasn't fond of that idea. So instead, I made a fake Facebook account and messaged his wife, telling her he'd been having an affair with me. 2 weeks later, she packed up the kids and moved across the country to live with her parents. Now, he's being sued by 6 other people, and he's millions of dollars in debt because his wife was financing his business, and now she's gone. Story 3. First of all, this post is making me feel super old because you had an iPhone in high school and I had a Motorola StarTAC and thought I was the coolest. Anyway, my story isn't as dramatic, but it felt really good. I was kind of a nerdy girl. I liked video games, was in band, and around 8th grade, I went from being tall and lanky to, well, quite pretty. I didn't notice at first, but apparently the boys did. There was a new girl at school that year, and I tried to befriend her since I knew what it was like to be the new kid. Everything was fine for a while until she got a crush on this boy, and that boy told her he'd always wanted to date me. I wasn't interested in him at all because he did drugs and beat people up, which has never been my thing. Fast forward to me in the bathroom before lunch, washing my hands, and she pushes me up against the paper towel dispenser, threatening to beat me up if I ever went near her man. We were in 8th grade, so it was pretty dramatic. I went straight to the principal and told them she was scaring me and that I didn't even know she had a boyfriend. She got in trouble, got angrier, and tried to fight me again. This time, my mom got involved, and it escalated until she was expelled. On my first day of high school, I saw her and she spat on my shoes, telling me I'd better run. So I ran for my life and jumped into my mom's car, yelling, "Drive, drive, drive." After that, the high school principal must have stepped in because the harassment stopped. 8 years later, I was managing a major staffing company in town. She came in to interview for a job. Needless to say, she never got the job or any job from my company. Not the most exciting revenge, but it felt really good. Story 4. I had a roommate in college for a couple of years, and he was one of the worst people I've ever met. He didn't shower, never washed his clothes, and I found out he didn't even own a toothbrush. For the 2 years we lived together, he failed his classes, didn't have a job, but always claimed he was smarter than everyone else. He ate my food, threw tantrums if I watched something he didn't like on the TV that I paid for, and kept piling up debts to me. I put up with it for way too long, thinking I was being nice, but eventually I snapped. He owed me a lot of money and hadn't paid rent for months, using his mom being sick as an excuse. I decided it was time to get back at him. I started playing music really loudly when he and his girlfriend had important things to do in the morning. One time, she threw chairs at me and threatened to kill me. That only encouraged me more. I began waking him up in the middle of the night, reciting Bible verses or reading from the Lord of the Rings. I'd hide around the apartment, jumping out and scaring him, acting insane, and daring him to hit me. He was so confused and scared, but eventually, I got him to pay me back all the money he owed. I didn't stop there, though. I tracked him on message boards and sent him weird song lyrics or cryptic messages. I even followed him into a bar bathroom once, put my hands on his shoulders while he was peeing, and told him I had spies everywhere. He ended up abandoning the apartment and moving in with his girlfriend, but kept paying rent until the lease was up. To this day, he still thinks I'm stalking him. Whenever I see him around town, he runs away. It's been 3 years, and I don't regret it. I'm just amazed at how good I was at torturing him. Story 5. One year, my relative tragically passed away, and my dad went through several life-threatening surgeries that left him in a wheelchair for 6 months. The stress from all of this, plus having to support my mom, caused me to fall behind in school, and I ended up having to repeat a year. I didn't tell anyone the reasons behind my delay, because I don't like airing my struggles. Some people knew about my dad's condition, but not many understood what I was dealing with. There was this guy, Matt, though, who wouldn't stop making jokes about me repeating the year. For 2 years, he constantly insulted me, calling me things like the geriatric student and implying that I was slow. It was relentless. One day, he left his school computer account open. He'd been working on assignments that made up a big part of his grades. His English work, drama coursework, and other projects were all there. I thought about messing with him by putting a silly picture in his files, but then I decided to go bigger. I deleted everything: his schoolwork, emails, personal files. My entire physics class watched me do it, and no one stopped me. Even the teachers saw what was happening, but didn't interfere. Matt had no idea who did it, and no one ever told him. He blamed it on the system, but they couldn't recover his files because I had been thorough. He had to scramble to redo everything before the deadlines. 6 months later, Matt got terrible grades and didn't get into the university he wanted. He had to settle for a subpar college. I don't know how much I contributed to that, but I like to think I had a hand in it. He was a jerk, and while what I did was wrong, I don't regret it. Eventually, I learned that he had a tough childhood, too. His mom died when he was young, and his dad wasn't really there for him. That explained a lot of his behavior, and though he was still an annoyance, I understood him better. Maybe one day I'll buy him a drink and confess that I was the one who deleted his work. Story 6. I worked for T-Mobile as an event rep, setting up activation events at big box stores. My favorite manager's boyfriend offered me a job at a T-Mobile exclusive dealer. At first, everything went well, but then he started interfering with my sales and taking my customers for himself. He was the manager, so there wasn't much I could do. He'd pull shady moves like upgrading one customer's line but taking credits from others and selling the extra phones as prepaid. He even reported phones as lost or stolen to activate new lines, all to boost his sales numbers. I found out he had a MySpace account that his girlfriend, my friend from T-Mobile, didn't know about. Turns out, he was cheating on her regularly. It got worse when he sold $3,000 worth of free phones using a stolen tax ID. Eventually, his scams caught up to him. I reported everything to my contacts at T-Mobile Corporate, providing account details and evidence of fraud. The entire store went under investigation, and the company running the franchise went out of business. But that wasn't enough for me. I told my friend about his secret MySpace account. She dumped him, and his ownership and job were destroyed. Meanwhile, I got a new job and performed at the top of my district. In the end, I brought him down, and I have no regrets. Story 7. One of my roommates during my junior year took a girl he was friends with on a date. He creeped her out because he was absolutely unhinged, and she refused to go on a second date. He had some of her belongings, CDs, and DVDs, and was holding them hostage until she agreed to see him again. She asked me if I could help her get them back, since he was being a jerk. I agreed, not just because of that, but also because he'd been using my computer for things he shouldn't have, causing trouble with the neighbors and generally being a menace. I asked him nicely to return her stuff, but he refused. So, I just took it and returned it to her. She was watching Mallrats with her friends in her dorm, and I ended up watching the rest of the movie with them. When I got back, he confronted me angrily. I had broken my arm a day earlier, so I wasn't at full strength, but a few weeks later, the girl asked me to hang out again, and I said yes. When I got back that time, my roommate attacked me. I managed to fight back, but he seriously messed up my arm, and my face was a wreck. When my arm was finally casted during finals week, I returned to the apartment with the girl. He was using my computer to finish a final paper, so we locked him out of the room. Well, let's say we made sure he heard us while we were at it. When we finally came out, I nodded at him as we left for food, but that's not the real revenge. The real revenge is that I married her 5 years later, and last month, we welcomed beautiful twin boys into the world. Story 8. This one's kind of silly, but I had a friend whose girlfriend was incredibly insecure and jealous. She demanded that he stop hanging out with me and other friends he'd known for years, long before she came into the picture. For the record, you can like someone's humor without wanting to date them. Eventually, I got tired of her antics and decided to mess with her insecurities. I flirted with her boyfriend at parties, dropped hints that we'd been together before, just petty, catty stuff. It drove her absolutely wild to the point where she tried to control his every move. It didn't take long before he realized how miserable he was and broke up with her. Unfortunately, we drifted apart after that, but I like to think I did him a favor by helping him see how controlling she was. Story 9. It was the late 90s and I was in high school. Like many teens back then, I was into drugs, and so was the girl I was dating. One weekend, I went camping, and when I came back, my pager was blowing up with messages from my girlfriend. When I finally got to her place, I found her in the back seat of my friend's car, beaten and bruised. Apparently, at a party, she'd gotten into an argument with a guy about weed prices. He claimed to be some kind of gang member and didn't like that a girl was challenging him. So, he grabbed her by the hair and started smashing her face into things. What pissed me off the most was that my so-called friends just stood by and did nothing. After making sure she was comfortable at home, I told her I had to run an errand and left. I met up with my real friends and we planned our retaliation. We didn't use guns, but we geared up with masks and bats, ready to confront the guys at the party house. We were about to make our move when an elderly couple spotted us. The partygoers saw us too, freaked out, and called the cops. We had to retreat before anything could happen. A year later, I heard that the guy who attacked my girlfriend had been killed in a different incident. Felt like karma. But then, one of his friends made a joke about the beating, and that's when my rage kicked in. Instead of confronting him physically, I befriended him. Within weeks, I had him hooked on meth, and his life quickly spiraled out of control. He lost everything: jobs, friends, his dignity. He went in and out of rehab, jail, and homelessness. Once, while he was in rehab, I visited him. I offered him some meth, and he took it. As we walked back to check him in, I whispered in his ear, "Never mess with me or my girl again." Then I told the staff he had drugs on him, and they restrained him and sent him off to prison. It was his last chance at rehab. Story 10. Back in high school, I did something bad. I stole a friend's girlfriend. I didn't know anything about dating etiquette at the time. They had broken up over a month ago, but I was more interested in the fact that she wanted to hang out with me. Being 16 and thinking, "Hey, attention," I didn't think about the consequences. My friend Bob didn't take it well. He started threatening me, and his friends would mess with me, closing my locker, messing with my food. I ignored it until they started targeting my parents' car. They poured garbage on it, egged it, and even smeared motor oil on the windshield. Eventually, I couldn't hide it from my parents anymore. I told some of my more intimidating friends about it, and one day they told me don't worry about it anymore. A week later, Bob's car was found stripped down to the frame on the school steps. I felt bad about it, but the harassment stopped after that. I hope Bob moved on and found better friends. Story 11. The most messed up thing I've ever done is actually happening in a couple of hours. My girlfriend of 2 years has been seeing another guy for the past 2 weeks. We just started going to different colleges, and she's been sneaking around. In a couple of hours, I'm going to drive to her house, gather up all the things I ever bought her, and take her to the beach down the street. I'm going to put everything in a fire pit, light a cigarette, take a long drag, and flick it into the fire. Then I'll toss the jewelry into the water and leave. Afterward, I'm going to grab coffee with the guy she cheated with, tell him how disappointed I am, give him the evidence, and wish him luck. I'll post about the whole thing on Facebook, let everyone know I'm open to meeting new people, and then go pick up my paycheck. Living well is the best revenge, right? Story 12. Some of my high school friends liked to toilet paper people's houses. I never joined in because, when I was younger, my house got TP'd, and it took hours to clean up, especially after it rained and turned the trees into a gross mess. One weekend, they decided to TP my house, thinking it would be funny. I wanted revenge, but didn't feel like TPing their houses in return. It wasn't creative enough. Instead, I came up with something better and recruited my parents to help. My mom had once broken her knee falling off a counter, which my friends knew about. So, on Monday, I acted angry and told them I wasn't upset about the TP, but about my mom falling off a ladder while trying to clean it up. I walked away, leaving them shocked. By the end of the week, they gave me a card they had made for my mom, apologizing for what happened. I didn't tell them the truth until 3 years later, and apparently, they spent all that time thinking my mom hated them. Story 13. When I was in grad school, I lived in an apartment complex just off campus. I had a 2-bedroom apartment with a large living area, which was great for hosting gatherings. Unfortunately, whenever I received deliveries, the UPS or FedEx drivers would leave valuable packages outside my screen door, even though I asked them to leave them inside the building. I was planning a trip with my girlfriend, so I asked my neighbor across the hall to bring in any packages for me while I was gone. They agreed, and I left them a spare key. When I came back, I was greeted by a disaster. My apartment was trashed. There was dog mess everywhere, and it looked like someone had thrown a wild party. My neighbors denied any involvement, but another neighbor mentioned they had seen my neighbors partying in my apartment for 2 nights in a row. These guys were hipster types, so I decided to get creative with my revenge. I went to a craft store, bought some candle-making supplies, and then picked up the dog mess, still fresh and disgusting, with a shovel. I mixed it with lighter fluid and pectin to keep it from drying out, then molded it around some wicks. I wrapped the explosives in the mixture and used candle wax to cover everything, making it look like a normal lavender-scented candle. I sent the candle to my neighbors, disguised as a gift from a local bank, knowing they loved candles and incense. A few weeks later, while hanging out with friends, we heard a loud explosion. We rushed over, pretending to check on them, and found their apartment covered in the mess. It was everywhere, on the walls, ceiling fan, AC unit, and even on their food. One of my buddies asked what happened. My neighbor replied, "I don't know, but this candle from the bank just exploded." My friend joked, "Smells like something bad happened." We chuckled and left. Story 14. At my small high school, homecoming week was always junior-senior war week, where students pulled harmless pranks on each other. But my senior year, things escalated quickly. People were slashing tires, breaking windows, and doing other dangerous stuff. My group of friends kept things lighthearted. We rolled a few houses, including one guy's house, who was a known jerk. The next day, he was furious about having to clean up all the toilet paper, and I laughed at his frustration. Big mistake. The next morning, I woke up to find my dog had died. I was devastated. At school, that same guy was bragging about how he'd poisoned my dog by putting antifreeze in its water bowl. I went straight to the principal, who called the police, and he was arrested. He ended up being sent to a juvenile facility. Years later, I returned to my hometown and saw him working at a local Walmart, looking miserable and alone. When I laughed at his misfortune, he punched me, which got him fired from his job. Last I heard, he's still struggling, and honestly, I'm glad. He deserved it for what he did. Story 15. When I was a child, my cousin molested me. It was a horrible experience, and the aftermath was even worse. His side of the family called me names and made me feel like I was the one at fault. He only served a year in a cushy institution, but I wanted justice. Fast forward to his senior year of high school. My godmother, who lived in the same town, found out he was returning to school without the administration alerting parents. She started handing out flyers in the school parking lot to warn people. At the time, my cousin was dating a girl who had no idea about his past. My godmother tried to give him a chance to tell her himself, but he refused and even said awful things about me. So, my godmother decided to take action. She visited the girl's parents, who were her friends, and showed them court papers proving what had happened. The girl was furious and horrified when she found out. The next day at school, she publicly confronted my cousin in front of everyone, yelling at him and revealing what he had done. The entire student body heard her. My cousin was so humiliated that he ended up dropping out. He later tried to join the military, but they rejected him because of his juvenile record. I'm forever grateful to that girl for standing up to him. She gave him exactly what he deserved. Story 16. I worked with a coworker I didn't get along with. It was a petty, constant rivalry. She had seniority over me and often took the overtime shifts, but then I received a temporary promotion to manager, which came with a pay bump. One week, my normal duties and my manager duties overlapped for an hour, meaning I earned double overtime for that period. It was a simple mistake, but I wasn't going to say anything about it. Unfortunately, she noticed and reported me to the union. As a result, I lost both shifts, and she picked up one of them for overtime. I was furious, so I decided to play the long game for revenge. I started by changing my attitude toward her, offering compliments and making small talk. Over the months, I built a friendship with her, getting closer and closer. She had a long-term boyfriend, but eventually we started flirting and things got personal. After 2 years of building this friendship, I convinced her to break up with her boyfriend. That night, I went over to her place, and things escalated quickly. When it was over, I casually remarked, "Most expensive moment ever." She looked confused, and I waited as she put the pieces together. Her face changed as she realized what I'd done. I laughed, got dressed, and left. We never spoke again, and I didn't regret a thing. Story 17. There was this kid in elementary school who bullied me constantly. It started with verbal abuse and stealing things like my milk carton, which I loved. It was devastating each time. By 5th grade, he started getting physical. One day, while I was at my locker with a friend, he grabbed my head and slammed it into the locker. I collapsed, crying, and everyone laughed. That moment left a lasting mark, both figuratively and literally. A couple of days later, I called the school and reported that the bully had threatened to bring his father's gun to school and hurt me. I was an emotional kid, so I guessed his father might own a gun. To my surprise, the police raided his house and found a replica gun, even though he tried to deny the accusations. They took it seriously. He was forced to make a public apology in front of me and everyone. Seeing him cry and apologize was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. He left school shortly after, became an outcast, and eventually attended a vocational school. I've heard he suffered from severe depression and struggled ever since. Looking back, I feel bad about how much I impacted his life at such a young age, but he was heading down a troubled path anyway. Story 18. In 9th grade, during a PE class, I was forced to play flag football. I didn't like it and was a big kid, so I knew I could accidentally hurt someone easily. One day, while I was getting ready in position, a kid came up behind me and kicked me in the groin for fun. I collapsed in pain while others laughed or cringed. This wasn't the first time he'd picked on me, but it was one of the worst. Fast forward a few months, and we're playing basketball during break. I got shoved while trying to catch a rebound, and my elbow accidentally hit a friend's mouth. My friend tried to fight me, thinking it was intentional, but we eventually stopped talking for 6 months. The same bully who kicked me was there, laughing and taunting me again. A week later, I finally called him out and we fought. He bloodied me up pretty bad because he knew how to box and I didn't. For years later, after high school, we ended up working at the same decking mill. He had some run-ins with the law and was due in court to find out if he had to serve time. On the day of his court appearance, I parked the forklift outside the door to lock him in, making him miss his hearing. When he finally got out, he was crying because he had to serve his 6-month sentence. I asked him if he remembered kicking me in PE, and he said yes. I told him I was the one who parked the forklift. Surprisingly, after he got out, he apologized for all the bullying and told me he had just been seeking attention. We've been friends ever since, and he really mellowed out after his time in jail. Story 19. This is a story about my mother. When I was a child, I was very sick, and my mom was the one who took care of me. Since we were on welfare, my dad was around, but my mom pushed him away. She also had a long-term affair with his best friend, but no one knew at the time. To justify divorcing my dad, she started making up stories about him being abusive. Eventually, she believed the lies herself, and everyone around her started believing them too. After the divorce, they shared custody of me and my sister, but my mom refused to let my dad see us, claiming he wasn't trustworthy. My dad gave up trying to fight, and I didn't see him for 10 years. During that time, my mom constantly told me how terrible my dad was, that he was a bad person who had done awful things. I believed her. Things got worse when my mom had an accident and lost her leg. She became incredibly controlling, and by the time I was 14, she made me pay rent to live at home. She was also dealing drugs and using them heavily. She wouldn't feed me because I looked like my dad, and she barely fed my younger siblings. Life was tough, and I eventually had to resort to dealing drugs myself just to survive. One day, I saw my cousin driving by and mentioned it to my mom. She called the police, telling them he had tried to run me over, and then threatened to turn me in for drug dealing if I didn't back up her story in court. Scared, I agreed. Luckily, there was a camera that cleared my cousin, and I avoided getting into trouble. When I turned 18, I moved out, but my mom called the police accusing me of stealing from her and assaulting her. After 2 years of her causing chaos, I finally had enough. I got back at her by slashing her tires, siphoning the gas from her truck, and breaking the windows of both her and my stepdad's vehicles. Then I moved to Virginia to start fresh. Story 20. When I was in 6th grade, my family evacuated to Texas because of Hurricane Katrina. We ended up in Houston, and I started attending school there. The bus I took to school was always packed, and on my first day, I noticed everyone giving me looks of pity as I walked in. One kid even offered me a seat, even though the spot was already crowded, but I kept walking and chose to sit in the back where there was an empty seat. After a few moments, I realized why that seat was empty. The bullies of the school sat in the back, and as the new kid, I was an easy target. They started making rude, racist comments, which stung, especially because I'm Asian. I stayed quiet, just trying to get through the ride without causing trouble. The next day, I sat in the same seat again, determined not to let them intimidate me. But then, the leader of the group made a really offensive comment, and I'd had enough. I shot back a sarcastic remark that totally caught him off guard. When I got to my stop, I realized they had followed the bus, waiting to confront me. There were 6 of them, and while I was scared, I stayed calm and just walked toward my house. As I was about to go inside, the leader made one last rude comment, and that was it. I turned around, ran toward him, and punched him square in the face. I kept going, not stopping until he was on the ground. Before I left, I gave him a final kick to the leg, which ended up breaking it. The rest of the group quickly ran off, leaving him behind. The next day, when I got on the bus, the entire bus erupted in applause. Being the new kid, it was honestly kind of amazing to get that kind of recognition. Later, I was called into the principal's office to explain what happened. I told them about the verbal harassment and how I acted in self-defense when they tried to confront me. The school punished the bullies by making them sit at the front of the bus from then on. Later that day, the bully and one of his friends came to my door to apologize. He couldn't even make eye contact with me. His leg was in a cast, and he had walked all the way to my house to apologize for what he'd done. Story 21. My high school golf coach was notorious for being difficult. He wasn't the best golfer, but he loved the students who kissed up to him. For some reason, he had it out for me from the start. I thought I was done with him after moving up to the varsity team, but he was promoted to varsity coach at the same time during my senior year. Despite consistently performing well in tryouts, he still cut me from the team. He had no problem keeping his favorites, even though they performed worse than I did. I dealt with this unfair treatment all throughout high school, and when I graduated, I thought I had left it all behind. During college, I started making money as a Little League baseball umpire, working competitive travel league games. It was challenging, but it paid well. One day, while umpiring a game, I noticed my old coach on the sidelines. It turns out his son was on one of the teams. I hadn't realized he had a kid that age, but I remembered some rumors about him from high school, including one involving a student, which explained a lot. From that moment on, I decided to make his son's baseball career as difficult as possible. Every time his son came up to bat, I widened the strike zone, making it almost impossible for him to succeed. When he pitched, I made sure none of his borderline throws were called strikes, forcing him to throw right down the middle where the batters could easily hit him. This went on for a while, and eventually, the coach realized what I was doing. But by then, the damage was already done. His son's confidence was shattered. Even when I wasn't umpiring his games, I noticed his performance declined. He started swinging at bad pitches, trying too hard to compensate for his struggles. Over time, he slipped further down the lineup and was eventually relegated to a backup role. I don't feel too bad about it, though. His son, just like his father, treated others poorly. In the end, I like to think I gave him a taste of what it's like to be on the receiving end of unfair treatment.